Hi guys, how's it going? So I have been receiving a lot of messages and comments regarding a podcast that was released a few days ago, as it is a very anti-racing podcast, and a lot of people have been asking for my opinions on it and my thoughts on it. I guess the reason why a lot of people want to know my thoughts on it is because I am quite a followed equestrian. I always forget just how many people get to view my content and how many people it does reach. I reach about 5 million people monthly, which is essentially the entire population of New Zealand. I've had this following on the internet, not as large, but it continues to grow, since I was about 12 years old. So it is something that I've had for quite a long time, and it's something that I forget that my content does reach a lot of people. I am very heavily associated with the racing industry, both harness and galloping, as well as the rehoming side, and I do publish a lot of my work within both industries and in the rehoming side on my social media, which makes sense why people want my opinion. I am a standardbred harness rehomer and I am a thoroughbred rehomer. I'm licensed with New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, NZTR, as a track rider. I'm licensed with Racing Victoria as a track work rider. I'm licensed with Harness Racing New Zealand as a stable hand. I'm licensed with Harness Racing Victoria as a stable hand. I have also driven harness horses in Victoria, and I've also driven harness racing horses in New Zealand. And being a track rider, I've ridden a ton of gallopers. As well as that, I am also very recognised in just equestrian in general. I have been regularly recognised by the FEI, which is the Equestrian International Federation. They essentially make all the rules for everything equestrian globally, from pony club to your local show jumping competition to the Olympics. They quite regularly have done articles and been in contact with me, which is just insane. So when this podcast came out and I was getting a few messages, I was like, I don't know if I want to share my opinion, but I now know, when I sit down and think about it, I understand why, because a lot of people are aware of my work in both industries, and a lot of people, unfortunately but fortunately, know the work that I do and who I am. So to start this video, I thought I would talk to you about how I got involved in the racing industry and that kind of thing. So my involvement in the racing industry began because of my love for standardbred horses. I have been around standardbred horses my whole entire life. From the age of 3 to 16, I rode at a local riding school in Christchurch, which was not only a riding school where we learnt how to ride, but it also was a trekking or horse trail centre where clients and customers would come from all over the world, and we would take them out on horses down the beautiful river and around the beautiful New Zealand countryside. So our team of trail horses or trekking horses were all standardbreds. We had about 30 of them. They were all ex-harness racing horses, and they were numerous ages. I think our youngest may have been, 9 or something, and our oldest was in its 30s. But we had 30 standardbred horses. So from the ages of 3 to 16, I was dealing with these horses, and I was taking out clients for trail rides all around the beautiful New Zealand countryside from very young, and I was spending my afternoons riding these horses bareback down the roadside, and spending the evenings just going off to the river and giggling and cantering home in the dark on these standardbreds. And they got us home safely to our families, and they got all these clients home safely with so many beautiful memories and experiences of New Zealand without fail every single time. So that was my first interaction, and how my love for standardbred horses began was my entire childhood. Then when I was 16, I was given an opportunity to ride horses on behalf of a lady, and so I did that, and she was so thrilled with the work that I was doing that she bought me my first horse. And he was actually a half standardbred. He was out of a standardbred dam. His mother was a standardbred. And at that point of time, I was very involved with more of the equestrian sport side of horses, like the show jumping and eventing side and that kind of thing. So I quickly realised how looked down upon standardbreds were in the wider equestrian community. So I didn't announce that he was a half standardbred or anything. I kept that very close to my chest. My mother, who was also an ex-horse rider, she was very set in this old way that standardbreds can't go out and be riding horses and that kind of thing, or it's embarrassing if you're on a standardbred and that kind of thing, because that was the way of thinking, not just in New Zealand but just generations of people didn't have much more love or appreciation for Standardbreds than them just being a cart horse or a racehorse or just being more than a trekking horse. So I had my half Standardbred, and we did very well together. I got him up jumping to about 1.20 m, and all these kind of amazing things. But when people found out he was half Standardbred, they'd be like, what? No way. And they would like say it like that, in quite a disrespectful manner, because that like disrespectful to the Standardbreds, because they were like, if he's half Standardbred, how can he be doing all of this? And that's kind of when the cogs started turning, and I was thinking, it's like, wow, people really don't have much appreciation for the Standardbred horses. And at this point of time, my social media following was really taking off. I got to a point in my half Standardbred schooling where I was really struggling with some of his dressage work. So I looked locally, and I found a local dressage trainer. Her name was Rebecca Bex Nairn, and I started to get lessons with her. These lessons I think were weekly, and then they became fortnightly and that kind of thing, and she was an amazing trainer. She's an amazing horsewoman, and she very quickly helped me solve all the issues that I was having in my dressage training, and I was just so astonished with her knowledge of horses. Her and I very quickly built a relationship with each other, and she very quickly took me under her wing. Little did I know, aside from riding dressage horses and having wonderful success with Andalusian dressage horses and all sorts of things like that, she was also a Standardbred rehomer. I hadn't given really Standardbreds much of a thought, other than my horse being a half Standardbred. I hadn't given Standardbreds a thought since I was a child at this trekking centre. So one day after a lesson, Beck said to me, hey Laura, I've just opened a Standardbred rehabilitation rehoming charity. Would you be interested in coming and having a look? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And other than my half Standardbred, and he had a paddock mate that was actually a 33-year-old Standardbred, other than that, I had not been around Standardbreds at all since I was a child. So I rolled up to the Standardbred charity, and I was just instantly reminded of why exactly I fell in love with the breed so much as a child. I say to harness racing trainers, because it's a very common theme in Victoria at the moment, that harness racing trainers are trying to get in the galloping industry to go for the galloping trainer's license, the thoroughbred racing industry. And I say to every single harness racing trainer, what you will not realise, because you've only been around Standardbreds your whole life, like now getting into gallopers, into thoroughbreds, is you will not realise just how lucky you are with Standardbreds. Just their temperaments and everything are just insane. They are not real horses. Their behaviours are just unreal. The things you can do with a Standardbred, you could never, I mean, you could do with the odd thoroughbred here and there, but their temperaments and everything, their mannerisms and everything are just uncomparable. So I walked into the Standardbred charity, and I was instantly reminded, oh, I'm going to cry, but I was reminded of all the happy memories that I had as a kid. I remember all the nights giggling into the sunset with my friends, and all the tricks that I took all of these international clients out on and that kind of thing. And when I was going to leave Stable To Stirrup, that charity, that day, Bex turned to me and she said, would you be interested in becoming a horse trainer here? And I said, what do you mean? She's like, I will teach you the process of saddle breaking and how to school them and how to train them and show you the ins and outs of what I do, and then we can rehome the horses together. I thoroughly enjoyed my time working back with the Standardbreds again, and it was so lovely being Beck's wing woman. She taught me everything. She got me comfortably saddle breaking in the Standardbreds and showed me all their schooling and all their training and everything required for them to happily transition into ridden horses, and everything required of us to happily help them transition into ridden horses. So I held my job at Stable To Stirrup for just under 2 years. But as well as all the Standardbreds that we were getting from the racing industry, and we were breaking them into saddle and riding them and rehoming them, there were often times that we had to deal with rescue cases or very severe rehabilitation cases. Now, none of these were directly connected to the racing industry. They were always to the side. So one case in particular, we had 21 Standardbred horses that, for not really any fault of the industry or anything, there was just a health situation that went down with the trainer, but they were all left in a paddock and they became feral. So we collected all of them, and a lot of them had very long feet. They were full of lice. They had huge amounts of worms in their tummies. They were very unhappy horses. So often we were dealing with stuff like that. But overall, because when we were starting, we were not getting horses straight away from very respectable trainers and stables, because respectable trainers and stables care about their horses, so they're not gonna, when they retire, send them to nobody. So we were literally getting the worst of the worst of the worst at the very beginning. So more often than not, we were getting Standardbreds that turned up in not the prettiest shape, and yeah, there were a few injuries here and there, because what people need to remember is that if racehorses are sound and healthy and happy and they're good at their job, they would still be on the track. So if they're retiring, there is generally a clear reason. Either they have had a minor injury, maybe they've had a serious injury, but generally it's a minor one, or maybe they just weren't fast enough, whatever, or maybe they're a little bit old in age. So at the beginning of Stable to Stirrup, we were just getting bad horses after bad horses after bad horses after bad horses, until one day in particular, towards the end of my time there, we had a Standardbred arrive, and he was just immaculate. He arrived off the float and he had his 4 hooves were painted with hoof oil, and he had a freshly clipped coat, and he was all washed and shampooed, and he got off the float and I went, wow, this was so different than anything I had ever seen in my rehoming years at this point so far. And I said to Stable to Stirrup, I was like, where did this Standardbred come from? And they told me the details of his trainers and that kind of thing. And at that point in time, I was already feeling very devoted to Standardbreds' lives after racing. But I said to myself, I want to be part of their careers too, because I wasn't entirely happy with what I was seeing off the track, dealing with such lower class trainers, horses coming through and that kind of thing. But I felt hopeless just sitting at the finishing line waiting for these horses with open arms, that I wanted to instead be in the industry, see what was going on and make changes that way. So when this horse arrived just in the most beautiful order, and I found out which stable he came from, I messaged the stable. And at that point in time, I already had a little bit of a name. I mean, I had a social media following that was already quite large, and I was posting my work with these harness horses, Standardbreds, all over my social media and that kind of thing. So I messaged this racing stable and said, hi, would you guys consider taking on any more workers? To which they replied, we know exactly who you are, Laura. We'll see you tomorrow morning. And so I started at that harness racing stable, and I held that job until I actually moved to Australia a year ago. And I thoroughly loved it. I loved it. So I started at this harness racing stable, and I just started working there for the mornings, and then in the afternoons I'd go back to Stable to Stirrup and I'd do more rehoming work and that kind of thing. And then later on in the evenings I went and I rode my own team of horses, which now also included a Standardbred. So I was still just as busy with my riding as I was with my rehoming, and I was very happy and I was loving it. What a lot of people seem to forget when they're talking about the racing industry is they just tarnish it, that it's just this industry and they do not care about the horses. But what they seem to forget is the individuals and the people actually behind it. So when you see a racehorse, whether you're watching it when it's still on the track or you're watching it after the track, is what you need to remember are the team of people that went behind it. This horse was carefully planned from day one. Somebody out there was trying to decide which dam to cross with what sire. Somebody was waiting there for it to foal. Somebody was waiting and deciding which trainer to send it to. People were watching and waiting for it to get to the trials, watching and waiting for it to get to the races, maybe watching it succeed on the track, maybe unfortunately having the disappointment of it not succeeding. But whatever timeline that horse goes through, it has a bunch of people that are human and that they care, and they invest so much money and time into these horses. Not only do the breeders care, the owners care and the trainers, but also so did the staff. We know the ins and outs of every single horse. I've worked for 7 harness racing stables and galloping stables between New Zealand and Australia. My largest stable had 70 horses, and my current stable maybe has about 30. Regardless, I knew every single horse's name. I could tell you its breeding, I could tell you its quirks, its nicknames, all that kind of thing. We know the ins and outs of these horses. They're our colleagues, they're our co-workers, we love them with our life. I have never seen, in my personal experience in these 7 racing stables in both countries, I've never seen a horse being disrespected or being treated badly. They're just treated like colleagues and co-workers that we all love a lot. This horse's favourite scratchy spot or itchy spot is behind his ears. Like, we know the ins and outs of these horses. We spend every single day from the early hours of the morning till late in the evening with these horses. We're with them at home, we're with them at the races, and then I also was with them when they retired, which became such a rewarding process because I'd get these horses home to retire and I already had known them for months or even years. And it was like, you're in my paddock now. And so it was so exciting and so rewarding just doing that next step with this horse. There are a few points that I've seen quite a lot in the comments of this podcast, said quite a lot on social media that I also wanted to address, and there are a few things that I have previously been concerned about, which I will explain. So one of the main things that people are accusing racing trainers and stables of doing is locking horses up 24/7, which is not true, and it is not a common practice. I've never seen that 24/7 in Australia or New Zealand anyway. Maybe that happens globally, and I'm sure it does happen in Australia and New Zealand in some places, but it is not a common practice. In New Zealand, we're very lucky to have plenty of grass and plenty of space to put paddocks. So all of the stables that I worked for in New Zealand, our horses were kept outside 24/7. The only time we brought them inside is maybe if it was a bit wet or a bit rainy and that kind of thing, because we didn't want the horses standing around in water all day. I mean, who would? But other than that, they were out in paddocks 24/7. The other thing that is often commented on is that horses are isolated and they're alone. Yes, a lot of the time they are paddocked on their own, but they are only a nose touch away from another horse. They can touch their paddock mate over the fence. I've never been at a stable or anything where a horse is completely isolated from having a mate next door and that kind of thing. The reason that we keep them on their own is because people care about them, like I said before, from their breeders to their owners to their trainers to their staff members. We all care about them. We don't want to see them play fighting and getting injured, because horses are horses. They're capable of hurting us, as I'm aware, because I essentially almost died, or I did die and was resuscitated in a horse accident, whatever. But they're just as capable of hurting us as they are of hurting themselves. Anyone who has horses will tell you just how silly they are, and it's not a term that I like to use, but how suicidal they are. The situations they get themselves in are absolutely ridiculous. Because we are looking after animals that are worth a lot of money, we're going to take these extra safety precautions to try and keep them from hurting themselves or hurting each other. Another thing too is they're not always on their own. Like younger horses, for example, because in the racing industry it is very common in harness and galloping that we do start training them very early in age. They are very often, when they first come to our stables, they have a paddock mate. It is very rare that you see yearlings or younger horses alone. Very rare. They usually have a mate or someone with them. Also, it is very common that after the horses harness or gallopers have a day at the races or the trials or that kind of thing, that it's like, cool, you've done your work, you've done what we've prepared you for, what we've bred you for, what we've trained you for, what we've wanted from you, so now you can just be a horse. So it is very common that we then take them out to a paddock and we let them relax and chillax and just be horses. Or if they're at the stables, we'll take them out of their stable for a few days, chuck them in a paddock, that kind of thing. Or in New Zealand, often when we got back from the races, we would literally put all the horses that we took to the races that day in a huge paddock, and they'll just run around and just be horses and have fun, because they did what we wanted from them and what we had prepared them for, what we trained them for, what they are bred to do, and now they're just allowed to go and be horses. Another common thing that I saw commented on is feeding, which I saw a lot of people accusing the racing industry of misfeeding their horses or not feeding them at all, which is absolutely ridiculous. I have not only been responsible for the ordering of feed and the making of feeds for many of my stables, including my current stable. I do often make the feeds, but in New Zealand I held a role where I was feeding 70 horses 3 times a day. I was making their breakfasts, their lunches and their dinners, so I am very well aware that they do eat very substantial amounts of feed. So yes, this feed is hard feed, but they are given large amounts of grain, they're given large amounts of fibre, they're also given large amounts of whatever mineral they may be lacking in and that kind of thing. The quantities of feed they receive a day makes you feel very ashamed about your own horses. You go feed your horses at home and you're like, oh, maybe I should give you more. Like, yes, our horses at home might not be doing the same strenuous or intensive kind of work, but Like, it really puts you out. You look at the feeding guides on the back of a typical hard feed bag at the feed store, and it says maybe 2 to 5 kgs a day, and you think, wow, that's a lot. And then you go feed a racehorse and you're like, I see why they put that, because we do probably give them in each feed 2 to 5 kgs of it. But essentially they get a lot of grain, they get a lot of fibre, they get a lot of minerals, they get everything that they need. A minimum of 2 times a day at all of my stables, minimum, but at most of my stables 3 times a day. They receive a large breakfast. Usually they get a little bit before they work, then they receive the rest of it after they work. We also give them a lunch, and we also give them a dinner. Not only that, but at all my stables, all the horses have either had 24/7 access to forage, hay, or lucerne, or baleage, that kind of thing, or we give them some in the morning after they work, and we give them some before we go home. But regardless, they never eat all of it. There's always still a little bit left over. The only times that you see horses without hay is if they have an upcoming race, or that kind of thing, which is a very common practice in both the harness racing industry and the galloping industry, is that you remove their hay maybe the day before they're racing or the day of that they're racing, because you don't want them to be filled up with hay. I can go into all the scientific and stuff and talking about it and stuff, but that's not my purpose of this video. My purpose is just to explain my first-hand experience and that kind of thing. Another thing that has been commonly talked about is people are disgusted by the ages that the horses are trained and worked and that kind of thing. And yes, I will admit that was a very eye-opening thing. As I've mentioned before, I had a very horsey childhood, from pony club to show jumping to dressage to eventing and that kind of thing. So I grew up with the understanding that horses should only be lightly brought into work at maybe 3, whatever, 4, and then you can probably start progressing them as they get a bit older towards maybe 6 to 8. And so when I first entered the racing industry, that was a huge shell shock thing for me, was these horses were getting trained as yearlings, and they were racing as early as 2 years old. But what you need to remember, these aren't specific trainers or specific countries or whatever that is setting these rules. This is on an international scale. So 2-year-old racing and harness and galloping is often worth the most. And so if you're a trainer, you have to prepare for these races, because you've got owners that are breeding these horses and getting them in for these races, quite significant races to win, and are worth a lot of money. And if you're going to turn down and say, oh, I don't want to race a horse that's 2 years old, you're not going to get any clients, and you're not going to be competitive, and you're not going to be in the racing scene. But this isn't, like I said before, like, New Zealand has these requirements, as does Australia, as does the United Kingdom, as does America. This is a huge international thing. This is not just one industry, one rule. This is just the requirement. And the other thing that you need to remember is, which I can say because I have been at 7 stables, is they all work in very similar ways. It is almost like they've all attended some kind of how to be a harness racing trainer or how to be a galloping trainer school, but there are educations and programs that you are a part of. Like, I have done the New Zealand Harness Racing Drivers Cadet School, and I'm currently part of the Racing Victoria Track Work Rider Development Program, which leads onto a jockey apprenticeship program if I choose to go down that path. So yes, there are education and so many things that you can do within the racing industry, which these educations are absolutely insane. Not only do you sit with stewards, you sit with vets, you sit with trainers, you sit with drivers, you do so much. It's insane, and they're actually worth, like, the ones in New Zealand are the equivalent of NCA. Like, you can do these courses and you can get credits towards passing high school. They require a lot of bookwork and a lot of exams and a lot of all of this kind of thing. But no, essentially it feels like every harness racing trainer and every driver went to the same school, but they may have gone to some of these programs, but essentially they didn't, because what people need to understand is this is generations and generations and generations of ways and things that are just continually being passed down, that people are learning and stuff like that. But the racing industry, even in the time that I have been in it, is becoming so much more modernized. Like, things are always improving, things are always changing. But if you can't hate on a single trainer or a group of trainers, or try hate on an industry in a whole country without just realizing the bigger picture, this is a global scale. And trainers, like I said before, from the breeders to the owners to the trainers to the staff members, we all treat the horses with so much respect and care. We love them to pieces. I would not be involved in these industries if being a horse lover if I didn't enjoy going to work every day. And like I said before, it has made me so much happier in the rehoming side of things too, because I now know so much more about these horses in the industry, and I know all their quirks and all their stories, and then I can continue that story and with them as a retired horse, whether it's a thoroughbred coming for retraining or it's a standardbred learning how to be a riding horse. It's so rewarding and so cool. I'm very lucky in the sense, through the work that I have done through the rehoming and my time in the racing industry, that I have many amazing contacts and people. I'm in regular contact with all of the stables that I've worked for. I've left all of them on very good terms. In fact, most of them have said to me, "You're more than welcome here whenever you want," and that kind of thing. But it has done wonders for my work in rehoming, because it has made me so approachable and connectable to so many trainers and to stables, and that was my goal. My goal when I got involved in the Stable To Stirrup and stuff like this was like, how can I be involved in the industry? Because I want to see what's going on, understand more about it, and be a part of it in that way. And I have done that not only on a New Zealand scale but internationally, and that is so amazing and so proud. And like, I understand that people may watch this and be like, yeah, but this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, whatever. And there are always going to be bad things with every industry. A show jumper could sit down and talk about all the wrongs in show jumping. A dressage rider could sit down and talk about all the wrongs in dressage, like roll cur and stuff like that. Yes, there are going to be bad things in every industry, every single industry. But the racing industry as a whole is not something to be shaming or to be hating on or that thing. Horses love to race. They love it. It's what they're bred for. Everything in their DNA is telling them to go on the track. 99% of them love it. There's like the odd 1% that doesn't want to be any more than a quiet hack or a pet, but most of them love it. Like my horse, for example, Classy, he had a very successful racing career, and he actually raced till he was 9 years old. I mean, horses are eligible to race in most states and most countries until they're 14, but our stable decided to retire him when he was 9. He was still sound and happy, he just wasn't trying as hard anymore. And even now, as a 13-year-old, I can get him back in the car, or I can put him in a track saddle and he can be a fake thoroughbred for a day, and he just loves it. His ears are like pricked forward the whole time, and he's just so happy. It's what he's done from day one, and it's what he thinks his purpose is, and it's what he enjoys. And there's nothing more rewarding than being an ex-racehorse rehomer, but keeping the horses sound and happy and allowing them to do what they love to do. But like I said at the start of the video, I have had nothing but respectful experiences with Bex Nyan. She was an amazing advocate for me. She got me involved in this line of work, and I'll forever be so thankful for her knowledge and for her advice. But what I need people to understand is problems aren't just New Zealand or aren't just Australian. They're like an international, global thing, and they're internationally accepted, and it's just the way that we have to do things. But without a doubt, you just need to remember that these horses were not just in it for money or that kind of thing. Like, racehorses are such prized possessions. If they need a vet, they have a vet. If they need a body worker, they have a body worker. If they need the dentist, they have the dentist. If they need the farrier, they have the farrier. Everything that a racehorse needs at every single stable that I have worked for, they have gotten straight away, which made me feel so embarrassed for so long, that I felt like I was rescuing racehorses. I was not rescuing them, I was rehabilitating them, and I was only seeing the most dire parts of the industry because that's all I was involved in. But then when I got out and about and started getting a better name and meeting more connections and stuff, I saw nothing but positivity, and I've continued to see nothing but positivity. So I've tried to record this video so many times, and I've drunk like 2 coffees because every time I like stop it, I remember something else and I say it. So no doubt I'm going to post this and I'm going to be like, oh, I missed something really important and that kind of thing. But regardless, I've dedicated my whole life to horses, and I've dedicated my whole adult life so far to the retraining and rehoming of ex-racehorses and my involvement in the racing industries. I've proved how dedicated I am by almost losing my life working in the racing industry, and it hasn't put me off a single bit. not a single bit. It is a line of work. Regardless, I don't know if one day I'll be a harness racing trainer or a galloping trainer or a jockey or a driver or what I'll be doing, or maybe I'll just be a rehomer. But whatever avenue it is, I know it will be somewhat involved in racing, because that is such a huge passion of mine, is being with the horses, being a part of what the horses are bred for, watching them excel at what they're bred for, or maybe not excel, but then also being there with open arms to help them transition into their new lives.